Welcome back to Manor Farm. Coming up, they look good, taste good, and you can share them with your children. Tom Sergi sets himself the ultimate Halloween challenge with the scarily good party cocktails without the booze. And bringing the Bum Bang a Bang back into all our lives after she apparently banned it from her set list. Lulu on that song, making musical history and a career highlight, starring in Heartbeat. Aidan's field was never quite the same. But first, much like Bond, we all have our favourites, whether it be Roger Moore, Daniel Craig or Sean Connery. And when it comes to a certain busybody octogenarian, it's much the same, with no shortage of contenders to portray Agatha Christie's greatest ever female detective. And what a stellar list it's been.
Good morning.
Oh, good morning, Inspector.
Look at you. Your cheeks are pink, your eyes bright. You're enjoying yourself. Isn't that so?
Dr. Haydock, I would be very distressed if I thought you believed that the only excitement in my life was predicated on the unfortunate fate of helpless victims who somehow seem to fall into my path.
Oh, Jane, you're so clever. Why haven't you solved this mystery by now? You don't seem to be getting on at all. I thought you'd know at once.
No, dear, I didn't know at once. Not for some time.
That's very interesting. Tell me, Jane, why did you show this to me? Well, Let's put this back, shall we? It only seems fair to give the police a chance.
Is it from a secret admirer?
Hardly. Father Gorman's a man of the cloth, dear.
Stellar indeed, and we're surrounded by them now. I feel quite nervous. Welcome to the man who's made a special study of the spinster sleuth in all her manifestations. Mark Aldridge. Mark, welcome. Agatha Christie, Marple, expert on wickedness.
Yes, well, that's what she is. Yes, yes. Lovely to meet another fan of Miss Marple.
Oh, I am, both on screen and in the books. And this is quite unputdownable. I found myself, I'll dip in. It's a dipper. It's not a dipper. You're riveted. And here they all are. Yes. She first saw the light of day in print when? When was the first Miss Marple?
So she first appeared in short stories in 1927 through to 28, which is interesting because it's the year after things like Agatha Christie's marriage broke down.
Oh, is this when she disappeared up
yes,
was found in Harrogate?
Yes, yeah. So I don't think it's much of a coincidence that the next year she creates a strong female character who doesn't need a man and is able to figure things out for herself.
Who was the first screen Marple then?
Well, it depends on how you want to count it. Gracie Fields actually played Miss Marple.
Over.
Yeah, on American TV. So, yes, that was unusual, an unusual accent coming from Gracie Fields as well.
Yes, that's right, Miss Marple and Lancastrian.
Yes, but the first that really made an impression was Margaret Rutherford in the early 60s.
Now, did Agatha Christie approve of her screen Marples? How many of them did she see?
Well, she saw Margaret Rutherford, and that really was the only one, because Agatha Christie died in 1976, and it was actually when Margaret Rutherford was cast. Initially, Agatha Christie thought, well, she's not my Miss Marple, but she's a very good actor. But then as time went on and she started to appear in films that were Poirot stories made into Marple ones, and one that was really a complete invention, that's when she really got quite upset.
So she was overruled in a way, I suppose, by the financial incentives to let Miss Marple appear on screen, because the amount of money she must be giving in those days, huge amounts of money, very difficult to say no to that.
Very difficult, and of course you've got to give some leeway to producers. If you sign up, because it was MGM, the big studio, and they optioned loads of Agatha Christie stories. So you can't say, oh, it must do this, must do this. But she didn't really realise how many changes they'd make.
You wrote a book on Poirot called The Greatest Detective in the World. Little knowing that you were going to write about the other one. Who to you, then, is the complete aficionado of all the books? Who is the greater detective?
Well, the thing is, Miss Marple would never call herself a detective, you see. She is an expert on wickedness. She's great on human nature. She can really work things out from psychology and what people are likely to be. So she would be too self-effacing to consider herself a detective, whereas Poirot, a little bit more arrogant, would be very happy to say he's the greatest detective in the world.
Frequently does,
Yes,
I think, really.
frequently
Talks
does.
about himself in the third person,
Yes.
you know, it's a bit much. It's intriguing, isn't it, because here she is, and I have to say, for me, the ultimate manifestation. I'm a huge fan of Julia Mackenzie and Geraldine McEwen and Margaret Rutherford as actors. For me, the definitive was Joan Hickson. Now, in my memory, didn't Agatha Christie at some point tell Joan Hickson she would make a good Marple, or am I imagining that?
No, you're not imagining it. And the problem with this story is it sounds apocryphal, like it's too good to be true,
Yeah.
but it is true. She wrote her a letter decades before she became Miss Marple, when she was a much younger actor, saying, I hope that one day you may play my Miss Marple. And it was after a few weeks of filming that Joan Hickson rediscovered the letter and brought it to filming, and everyone couldn't believe it. But yes, it's true. But when you think she was nowhere near the right age, and yet clearly Agatha Christie saw something.
Nowhere near the right age back then.
Back then, when the letter was sent,
But Agatha Christie clearly saw what would come, what would
Yes,
happen.
yes.
There is a saying in our family, and it's entirely down to her, and the saying in our family is, oh dear. Because she was so much, it's that classic brilliant acting when you can see what they're thinking. You can see the cogs whirring. And with Joan Hickson, you most certainly did, didn't you?
That, for me, is why she's my favourite as well. Her listening acting was amazing. And that's what Miss Marple is. She has to be listening to other people. I interviewed Julia Mackenzie, who's obviously a fantastic actor and a great Miss Marple, and she actually said it was one of the toughest roles she's ever had. Because you can't really be the star. Like Miss Marple isn't someone who takes centre
wallpaper,
stage.
really, aren't you?
Yes.
The one that people shouldn't really be noticing.
Exactly, which is really, really tough. And I think that both of the actors actually do that really, really well.
Yeah. I can't, not show a little bit of my favourite Marple title sequence. And it is, of course, that one with that glorious little tune. I know it's all about murder, but they're so comforting.
I know. Well, when they were making the title sequence, the thing from the producer was that it should be superficially beautiful, but with a hint of darkness. So you've got that cricket scene, but there's a dead body at the side of it. The beautiful house, but someone mysterious in the window. Gave many a person a nightmare, I think, over the years.
But you see, compared, as you were saying, with Poirot, detective, she lives in a village, St Mary Mead. There's nothing glamorous going on except wherever she goes somebody dies, and they must have rumbled to that. She invented Midsummer Murders, really, didn't she, in terms of body count. But it all comes as a result of observation and of knowing the human psyche and the human condition, doesn't it?
It really does. And I think the interesting thing with Miss Marple in particular is that the times change with her. So actually, by the time we get to the 1960s, she's talking about St Mary Mead with a development. There's a new housing development on the side. She was a contemporary writer. She didn't just write about posh houses and nice trains and stuff. She looked at what village life's changing. Miss Marple did the same.
Let's talk about travesties. I mean, there must have been some, because this has been going, as you say, she came to the fore in short stories in 1927. There were 12
novels in about 20 short stories.
And that's all the material, in theory, to work on, but clearly people decided to choose her and put her in all kinds of things. What were the really, really bad ones?
Well, the one that really upset Agatha Christie was the final Margaret Rutherford film called Murder Ahoy, in which Miss Marple is now descended from, an admiralty, and although there's a hint of that in one of the novels as well, but now she wears a sort of admiral's outfit, and there's lots of, singing Rule Britannia as she does, and there's another one, Murder Most Foul, where Margaret Rutherford goes on stage as Miss Marple and gives a Shakespearean speech, which is very Margaret Rutherford, but not very Miss Marple.
How much control did Agatha Christie have then in those early... So you're saying she died in the 70s, so it's before, certainly these three here. Did she relinquish control entirely? Did she have any control over MGM?
So with MGM, it was all sort of by negotiation, and actually after the upset over that film, The Murder Ahoy, the contract sort of didn't go much further because they were pushing for different things. Agatha Christie and her family saying, we want it to be more like, you know, the books, and MGM saying, well, we want the freedom to do other things, including with people like Poirot, to make him maybe more desirable to women and stuff like that. And that's why I think we get the Joan Hicksons, because after Christie's death, the Christie estate is saying, we want a proper Miss Marple, as I always consider it, who really does what's in the books.
Well, we've had the most wonderfully definitive Poirot with David Suchet. What most consider the definitive Marple. I mean, do you consider Joan Hickson the definitive?
I do, yes, I do. She's just so strong, and she's got that steeliness. Like she's very nice and personable.
Well, she's no pushover though.
But
is she?
you wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of her, would you?
No. They sort of stopped with Julia Mackenzie on the book. Are we going to, do you think, see more? Are there any hints in the air that there might be more Marples coming, television-wise?
Well, I think it's her time, don't you think? I think it's time for a new Miss Marple. So I would be really surprised. I have no inside information, but when I spoke to James Pritchard, who's great-grandson of Agatha Christie and CEO of Agatha Christie Limited, he said, well, maybe it is starting to be time that we look more seriously. So I'd love to see a new take on Miss Marple. We've got the definitive ones for me, but there's always new audiences who might want a fresh take on her.
Mind you, we've also got AI.
Yes.
We could make a new Joan.
Get through the short stories.
Yes.
Rather than just do the
Watch
novels.
this space. You never know what's going to happen. Oh dear. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Alan.